So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Brian Hansen from the Werner Institute.
Thank you, Derek. Glad to be here, and hello to everybody out there watching this on the webinar, and to those that are watching us in the future on the archive. My name is Brian Hansen, and I was asked by Mr. Purcell to come in and help this fine group of gentlemen put together a workshop on negotiation and conflict engagement for those that will be fulfilling the role of an accountant. And I'm going to give you a disclaimer right now. I have no accounting expertise. That's not my area that I've studied, but I do have a background in organizational development, organizational conflict, and conflict engagement. I help organizations, have helped some financial organizations in the past work together better as a team and to help overcome some issues that may have been stifling workplace productivity. I work here at Creighton University in a program, master's degree program called the Werner Institute, where we provide people from all different professional roles a master's degree in negotiation and dispute resolution. We are housed right over across campus in the School of Law. And to those of you that are here, I gotta give a little plug for our program. We do have a wonderful program, and lots of people from all sorts of roles find that negotiation and dispute resolution skills really help them excel in their professional development initiatives. And we do have a brochure up here on the table by the door, so if you are interested, feel free to pick up a brochure. Or if you have any friends that might be interested, feel free to pick up a brochure. And want to go ahead and get started. I've got some good helpers here throughout this workshop. You'll be seeing them come in. It's going to be helping set the context for the content that I'm providing by doing some scenarios, and also have somebody helping on the website. So those of you that are out there watching this webinar, do make sure that you are comfortable, or you are encouraged to participate in this dialogue. You can do so by either utilizing the chat function, and we will see any comments, questions, or concerns you might have in that chat box. Or if you do want to utilize your audio, if somebody on your end would like to be a voice for the folks at your campus, just simply raise your hand, which is the virtual five-fingered hand there right below the list of attendees. We will see that, and we will give you some space to go ahead and interact in this conversation today. Try the next slide. First thing that I want to do, though, whenever I start off an introductory workshop on conflict engagement, I always ask this question. And that question is, what is the first image that surfaces in your mind when you hear the word conflict? And ask the crowd here, but anybody that wants to type in what the first image is out there, please do so as well.
Yeah, I would say that argument is something that comes to my mind.
Argument?
Yeah, like more like a negative aspect.
Yeah.
Anger.
Very emotional.
Opposing
viewpoints. Conflict. What pops in your mind?
War.
Two forces clashing. That's good. Anyone else? Share what pops in their head when conflict arises? Opposition, like the opposing forces. Well, as you can see, most of the responses that I generally do get when I start out a workshop like this or initial training are typically conflict is something that is seen as opposing forces clashing, war. There's negative emotions, or emotions such as anger, frustration is something that I hear a lot. Conflict is all of those things. conflict can be scary. It can be destructive. It can devastate the world that we live in. But what I hope after this presentation today, that hopefully you see conflict as what it truly is, which is it exists everywhere. It's part of every one of our lives. We experience conflict on a daily basis. And although it can be destructive, it also can be a source for growth, creativity, innovation, productivity, relationship development. There are lots of good qualities that do come out of conflict. And something that I use as a metaphor to kind of paint this picture a little better is I relate conflict to fire. Fire is an element in our world where when you think of it from one perspective, it can be very destructive. It can be damaging. It can be painful. It can cause a lot of strife and hurt. But without fire in our world, without that element, we would not have the world that we have today. Fire is a source of energy. Fire is a source of heat. It really provides the world we live in a foundation for really succeeding in this world and for growing and thriving in this world. So something that I want to hopefully shift in your perspective of conflict is how, yes, if viewed in one way, conflict can be scary and destructive, but if looked at in a more holistic manner and looked for the positive outcomes of conflict, it can really be very beneficial to your own growth and to innovation within your work team. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you, objective. So what we're going to do today to help shift that perspective is we are going to try to understand what the various processes available to resolve conflict include. We're going to discover the most appropriate strategy for engaging in conflict, identify the various worldviews in relation to negotiation, develop effective communication skills to help resolve conflict, and introduce one process for collaborative problem solving. So pretty ambitious amount of content that we're gonna try to tackle today, but I think we'll be able to give at least some insights on engaging in conflict and really being more successful in a negotiation. Let's go to the next slide. You just run right through them. So there's a variety of processes that are utilized for resolving conflicts, and I'm sure your familiarity with all these processes. You probably are familiar with at least the names. Probably where you guys are at, college students, you might not have very much experience actually engaging in any of these processes, but they're very important to understand. The spectrum that I have listed here kind of starts with negotiation. We all negotiate on a daily basis. It's simply anytime we're going back and forth in a conversation where there might be conflicting views or conflicting interests, that's a negotiation. We're negotiating for very small things on a daily basis, like, who's going to wash the dishes, to very important life-changing things like, what is my job going to be when I finish my college program, and how am I going to negotiate the salary that I'm going to get paid when I just jump out there and enter into the field. So negotiation is something that I'm sure everybody has experience with. Mediation, anybody familiar with what mediation is?
I'm not sure, but I can give it, I have like a third person. I can control that.
Perfect. You captured it greatly. Mediation is a process where you utilize a third party neutral to help facilitate the conversation. This is an informal process that oftentimes a workplace might go into when a dispute gets to a point where people are unable to resolve their issues through interpersonal negotiation. Third party that doesn't have a stake in the outcome will come in and go through a process that allows them to share their interests and look for mutual satisfying interests that can lead to a resolution. Thank you for that. Very, very good. Facilitation is very similar to mediation, but a facilitated dialogue is usually larger in scope, where you have many more parties or you have many more individuals that are all intending to come to an outcome based on shared interest as a team. So facilitated dialogue is different from mediation, where you might just have a team meeting or a dysfunctional team that is unable to really make progress in some of the goals or initiatives that they're working on. So you might bring in a third-party facilitator to help work with the dynamics in the room, structure a dialogue process that allows people to talk about the issues that are present in a more constructive manner. Arbitration is where we start to get a little more formalized in our dispute resolution processes. Arbitration is similar to mediation, where you have a third party come in and listen to the interests and positions of various teams or various parties, and will attempt to facilitate that dialogue to draw out more understanding of what the interests truly are. But the difference between mediation and arbitration is usually that arbitrator, who is a neutral, has a certain expertise in the area that's being disputed and will provide their opinion on what is the best outcome for that situation. So arbitration is something that you probably might be familiar with due to contracts that you might enter with, say, your cell phone, or with a credit card. There's a lot of arbitration clauses these days where if there are any disputes, they say, we're going to bypass litigation. You're waiving your rights from going to a court system, and we're going to resolve these disputes through arbitration. Lots of controversy around that. It is an alternative dispute resolution form, which is saving people from going to court, but there's also some issues with rights and your ability to have your day in court for those causes. So arbitration is a little more formalized, where you have a third-party neutral decide your outcome. Litigation is the process where you bring that forward. And that's when disputes have gotten to a point where interpersonal negotiation is not working. Maybe you've tried one of these alternative forms of dispute resolution, such as mediation or arbitration, and it still hasn't worked. And then that you say, I need my day in court, I need a judge to decide. It becomes very adversarial, and somebody else hands down a decision to you. Hearing this spectrum of processes for resolving conflict, I'm wondering how familiar you are with any of these? Anybody had experience with any of these processes?
I haven't had personal experience, but just in reading the newspaper and stuff, you hear a lot about arbitration and more serious aspects of how they resolve those conflicts.
Yeah, you probably see a lot of headlines, which it might sound like this isn't something that I'm going to have to deal with, but it does start at the individual level. You guys are going to be accountants in firms or in-house in organizations, where sometimes disputes that you're involved with at what might seem like a low level could eventually rise up this level of escalation to some of these more serious processes. So it's important to at least have a familiarity. Therefore, you can be more conscious of resolving these at the lowest possible level. Anybody have any beliefs that you see any of these words kind of similar to when you think of conflict, but when you see any of these, any beliefs about these processes or thoughts about how these processes might relate to your role as future accountants?
Well, I think of those five, negotiations probably the best one where you get a little bit of what you want, and so does the other person, as opposed to, for example, litigation on the opposite end of the scale. One person might end up very displeased, and the other person will, no one's going to be completely happy, but in negotiation, both sides work together as opposed to just clashing the whole time.
Wonderful.
Mediation too, especially in like auditing. The auditor kind of comes in as that middle ground between the company and the shareholders, and helps them see eye to eye.
That's a good point, because sometimes maybe our negotiation skills aren't going to be as good as they are, maybe due to, comfort levels with negotiation. Sometimes it's helpful to have that third party come in and be another voice in the room that's kind of looking out for those dynamics, where you can have the ability to share your perspective with more space. Thanks for sharing. Good. Any other thoughts? We'll move on. Joe, did you?
I'll just say, especially with that public accounting too, the idea of communication, being able to negotiate with the client what's going on, is definitely huge. And a lot of people think of accounting as just number crunching and making sure the analysis is right. But at the end of the day, you're trying to make sure that you can get across what you need to get across, and making sure that the client gets what they also get. You have to negotiate and mediate both of these things. So that's what we do after the session.
Well said. Very, very well said.